And we'll start with doing a little attendance. I'm Pete Peterson.
I'm Eric Croft.
Brett Dyson.
Jason Bockenstead.
Ona Brass.
Rose Bowling.
All right, fantastic. Let's start out by reviewing progress that we made on our 2017 priorities.
Okay, I believe that Rose has prepared a summary sheet of
Actually, that's from David.
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 Great. I believe David has prepared a summary sheet of all of the updates on each item that was included in the 2017 legislative program. We were not successful in the Port of Anchorage capital request. We are not stopping, though. Jason and I are actually leaving this meeting to head out to the port with the governor's chief of staff and show him all the wonder that is corroding wharf piles. So we're still pushing for the 2018 general obligation bond. We're getting some notice that that could be successful during this upcoming legislative session in January, not October. The next was the state operating budget requests, the ADV SAIP, Alaska Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Intervention Program, Mr. Dyson, no acronyms, and the Human Services Community Matching Grants were both successful in being funded.
Was there any reduction, or those were just flat funded?
They were flat funded.
Mm-hmm.
The expand incentives for community development was also successful in passage in SB 100. That allows the local governments to make decisions on how to abate or defer property taxes that may be assessed on projects that they want to see go forward. I believe that you will be seeing proposals on the Tudor and Elmore development either later this year or early next year about that. It's currently working its way through the CFO's office. The localized sprinkler exemption was also successful in the same bill, SB 100. That is an approximate decrease of about $800,000 on residential property taxpayers. The SB 91 correction for traffic fines at the bottom of page 5 was also successful. So that amounts to a little bit of revenue for us. And the final one is on page 7, the municipalities' ability to assess non-consensual liens was also successful. And that was also included in SB 100. So SB 100 became our favorite vehicle of the year.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think we felt like it was a pretty successful year. You know, we had our priorities that we went in with, and aside from the port, the three pieces that we were really focused on were all passed. So we feel good about it. 2018, we're going to try again with most of them. The port request will change a little bit based on project updates, and the other items, as of right now, the other items are intended to be included as well. The municipal attorney's office is keen on the statutory interest rate paid on property tax refunds at the bottom of page 5. And real estate, the electronic publication of real estate foreclosure lists, the real estate department is also very keen on that. They've been trying that for years. It's a cost saver for us. And there is another piece of legislation that was introduced last year, HB 176, which is a bill from Representative Zach Fansler that allows for an increase in Medicaid reimbursement to ambulance fees. And we are very supportive of that. We've done a little analysis, and our not the Medicaid reimbursement, but the amounts that we charge for ambulance fees within the municipality of Anchorage is actually much lower than most other I mean, there aren't any comparable cities, but other cities like Juneau and Fairbanks and Bethel all charge at least $100 to $200 more than we do for ambulance fees. So we're looking into that. But this HB 176 vehicle that's moving is so far hasn't seen any real opposition, and so we're in support of that also.
Okay. So we're going to be pushing for HB 176, and then electronic publication of real estate foreclosure list, and the statutory interest rate paid on property tax refunds.
Yes.
And let me see, what else? What about property tax exemptions?
The raising the residential property tax exemption, there was a bill introduced last year by Representative Christ Tompkins that would increase it to $100,000. That didn't see any movement. So right now we're focused on our local government level. We're currently at 20,000, but have the ability to go up to 50,000.
Right.
So there's still the ability to push a change at the state level.
This was an assembly added
Yeah.
priority last year. This came in the form of an amendment from the assembly.
I think it was members Croft and Dunbar.
I believe so.
So JKT's bill on 200,000 didn't move at all?
100,000.
100.
Yeah, it didn't move at all. I think that he introduced it and got a fair amount of pushback and decided that it wasn't going to be one of his priorities for the 2017 session.
Some of these things that I thought were going to be, that we had proposed as allowing us to do things were passed as requiring us to do things. And they're probably good things, but it is, like the sprinkler exemption, I had understood to be allowing us to do that on sprinklers. This requires us to do it.
No, this is actually the inverse of that.
So what we had discussed was moving that exemption from the mandatory to the optional, and instead it was just eliminated.
Okay.
For
Right, requires.
Yes.
And we
At the
said,
state level.
free us and let us choose, and they said you can't anymore.
Well, they just said this is no longer an exemption,
it's
required or optional at the state level.
Right.
It's governments that have building codes that require sprinklers to be installed in specific buildings now no longer receive the exemption.
Relocating the fire sprinkler exemption from 2945.030 to 2945.050 would allow communities that do not require fire protection systems by code to continue to offer this.
Correct.
But we do require fire protection systems.
Yeah, so we eliminated the sprinkler exemption at
So-
our level.
The sprinkler exemption was eliminated entirely. It was not moved to optional. It was just deleted from.
So the state has done that, and we've also done that at the local level, or we haven't done that yet? Or we're planning to do that for this year's, for the next budget cycle?
No, it's been done to my knowledge.
Yeah, so it was taken care of at the state level in the 2017 session, and ONA would know whether it's been.
So
I don't know if we have the option to not implement at the local level.
It'll be active for the 2018 tax levy, to my knowledge.
So is that what we really wanted, or we wanted the ability to do this, but it didn't really,
No, that's what, we wanted to not have to
because it
exempt
created all
that.
kinds of weird situations. It was an okay idea that created these weird.
It was exempting
Something that's already
that
required
we
by
require
code.
them to do. So they were getting a benefit for
Right.
something that they have to do.
And then I appreciate that we're keeping the residential exemption. I am a big fan, as you guys mentioned, of upping that to our current limit and then having the state allow us to do more. I think it helps poor property owners. The localized property tax exemption, that would be really interesting. I can't really see the state allow that would allow us to tax everybody from churches to charities to cemeteries.
It depends on how they went in and deleted or amended.
Be careful what we ask for.
Right,
Fred?
that's exactly right.
Yeah, obviously I'm a newbie here. Is this committee to guide our efforts in working with the legislature?
Right, yeah, we, the administration sets priorities, and then we, as the assembly, try to figure out which ones we feel we want to go to the legislature with and try to, convince them to move forward with some of our priorities. And this is sort of the organizing meeting to try to figure out where we are now.
And
So we figure out what we did last year, and then we can move forward with what our priorities will be for the next legislative
okay,
session.
all right. So, and then do we schedule a meeting with our local legislators?
Once we figure out what our priorities are, and then we can look and see what legislation has already been introduced that's still sitting there, and then we can maybe set up meetings with some of us, with some of the committee chairs to let them know that that's going to be continue to be a priority for us this coming session.
Yeah, I would really encourage us to pick out the finance committee members who are in the majority and assign whichever ones of us have the best relationship with those folks, because that's, in my view, the most effective way. Now this, are we supposed to do something special for this special session? If so, we better get our button gear. That's your item 4 here.
Right. Well, the governor was still deciding, I guess, over the weekend what he's going to ask them to work on in this upcoming special session.
Yeah.
And I don't believe he hasn't come out with a final list yet, has he? Or are we sure?
Nothing finalized.
Nothing finalized.
Yeah, he's put SB 91, criminal justice reform, on the call, and I would suggest that the Public Safety Committee, the Senate passed all of the stuff that the Judicial House hasn't done squat on it, and Walker has put that on the call for this, and I would suggest we might want to do a assembly resolution and any amendments we would want, to get it to them before that session, respectfully. The other thing, and please be patient with me, but let's see, there's nobody here from the press. So we end up being the social dumping ground for much of the state's problems. And I was talking with Nancy, who's kind of the homeless coordinator. I must have misheard. My hearing is bad, but she said it's $58,000 per homeless person, and there's 900 of them. Those are serious adult numbers, and that doesn't include what it's cost us for not only the property that's not paying taxes, but I was going to say denigrated, but depreciated property as a result of government actions, which I think will be some more. I've asked her to see if she can get a more inclusive number. But I would suggest that we get our assembly members prepared and say, look, here's what it costs Anchorage to deal with all the rest of the state's garbage, and we think that ought to be reflected in revenue sharing, and some of it. And please, I don't have a bad attitude, and so on. But it's only fair, that happen. If we're going to get all the problems, the problem causer should be the problem payer. And that's what we do on sewer assessments. Sorry, I shouldn't have used that, on water assessments and so on. But I suggest that would be valuable information for us to have. We can say we're the state's marine port, but indeed we also benefit from it and so on. We don't benefit from the homeless population. Ethan tells me that it's not 900 that are causing the $58K a year, it's more like 400. And you know, and I don't know, but there's still very serious numbers that we're having to deal with. So that's a respectful suggestion. I actually think it's a good one.
Right, well, you know, Anchorage is the transportation, business center, medical center for the entire state. And so many times people will end up here in Anchorage on their, for medical, you know, appointments or whatever. And then once they get done with the medical condition, then they don't have funding left to get themselves back to their hometown in Anchorage or in Alaska, wherever that is. And so next thing you know, they're on the street here in Anchorage, and so we're dealing with it. You know?
Yep. And I think it's be helpful to shine a light on what that downside impact on us is that really comes from the rest of the state.
The joys of social problems.
Yep.
The 91 fix is SB 54?
Yes.
I think the Senate acted, it came over
Yep.
as 54.
Yep.
Does, from the administration's perspective, that have the fixes that we want, that the prosecutors want?
It has many of them.
Yeah, but I would, I worked with that judicial reform guys for a couple of years, and they did a pretty darn good job, but I don't think it may have covered everything we care about, and that's worth looking at. Maybe get the police chief and Foley to.
Yeah, no, I was talking with one step lower than that, but Officer Case, who does a lot of the numbers and has been doing a lot of the 91 just before coming here about 54 and what it had in that they liked. That isn't a complete answer to that. There may be more things,
Yep.
but at least it had a lot of those. How do we want to treat SB 91? Was its failure that it was just wrong-headed from the beginning, or that it never had the treatment aspect that it promised, or that it didn't have the link? Like I spent a little time as a municipal prosecutor. It seemed to me when you add treatment and then you use the criminal justice system to say, I've got a bunch of time you could spend in jail, but you can spend it in treatment and I'll drop it all. That's your hammer to get them into treatment. And it was you worked more on it than I did, but it seemed to me mysterious to say, I'm going to cut out the hammer, and then even if I added treatment beds, how would you get them into them?
Yeah. So your first question is the bill was really well done, and the Pew Institute worked with us, several other states, and so on and so forth. And the philosophy of it is done very well in other states. Crime down, recidivism down, costs down, and so on. There were several things that got missed. One of them was minor property crimes. Second time you're on a conviction. I haven't talked to him lately, but there's a guy running around here that's got 13 arrests, and the courts are so backed up that they can't nail him and put his fanny in jail. So those are the kind of things that hit. But Walt Monaghan, he just said, it caught us all aback. We in law enforcement didn't understand, not prepared to deal with it. Prosecutors and courts, are not, and then they're all backlogged. So we as legislators, we sit down and make policy decisions, change the statutes, ordinances, and so on and so forth. We expect the executive branch to be paying attention and getting spooled up to be ready to deal with it, and oh, by the way, getting their folks aware and trained. Didn't happen. And certainly for Anchorage cops and troopers, they're spread so thin, that it's certainly understandable that they didn't get spun up. So it's a perfect storm.
And we didn't really get enough time for the bill to be completely implemented. There's still parts of the bill that are supposed to start coming on here the first of the year.
Yep.
And some of that was the treatment phase of it.
Sure it was. And you guys voted for, perhaps ignorantly, a resolution I had on restorative justice. The money the state gets from felons, PFDs, You know, if that had passed, there was somewhere between $6.5 and $9.5 million a year for treatment. You know, and that didn't happen. To my dear family friend Sean Purnell. No, with Bill Stoltz killed.
Yeah.
My pal
Even more
Stoltz.
family than that. Yeah. I feel like we got like beam seed, right? We were turning and we were heading in a new direction. We got hit on the side. We got
Yep.
one direction in might have been good, one direction out might have been good, but we just got caught crosswise.
Yeah.
Well, so the only reason I bring it up, Mr. Chairman, is it determines sort of how we present 91, right? What we say, how we can say you guys are the dumbest and it was the dumbest thing ever, and there's I've never seen as much public knowledge about the bill, right,
Yep.
in a long, long time, and everybody knows what SB 91 is, and we doing that wrong, we could sort of set back good, smart public policy 20 years by nobody ever touching at the public level that kind of a put him in treatment, not in jail philosophy. We make it so toxic, or we contribute to how toxic it is, that, or we try and give a more nuanced. It did screw up, but there were a couple other things that happened that blew this thing up.
Yep. Yeah. So, and are you guys pressed for time?
We're here till
All
1
right,
o'clock.
so when probably guys on my end of the political spectrum wrote the drug laws in the 1980s and so on, I'm sure there was a bunch of right-wingers there beating their chest, we're going to be tough on crime, throw them all in jail. You know, that's the way to deal with it. Hammond very wisely set up the Controlled Substance Advisory Board to continually review what's going on with street crime, what are the medical things, what's the treatment like, what should be criminalized, you know, what's ridiculous, and so on. It never met. So there was absolute irony that a defense lawyer, really bright lady here, had a defendant being sentenced over here, and she got up and said, if the state had done what it was in law, my client would not face this draconian sentence, presumptive sentence that's hanging over his head. Attorney General got up and said, well, the legislature really didn't mean it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so if they'd have really meant it, there would have been a penalty, and so on. So we have been ignoring it. I mean, he was between a rock and a hard place. You know, and if that attorney had been successful, how many thousand other sentencing things would be back in front of the court? You know, I mean, you would appreciate the situation they were in. But so, anyways, I put 3 words in the statutes that got that thing going. Including it was the Attorney General's PCN number that went away if it didn't get implemented. That got struck, and so on. But I mean, those kind of, when Dunbar worked as an intern, he helped get one of the silliest things. Pete, if you ever have an operation and give you some oxycodone to get you through the first 2 or 3 days, the cops ever catch you with that bottle in your car, it was a Class C felony.
Mm.
In the car.
Well, how are you supposed to get it home from the pharmacy?
Oh, no, if it had expired.
Oh, expired.
As soon as it expired. You know, I've got a couple of bottles. I got one in my remote cabin and one on my boat in case we have a trauma, you know, at some time. But I'm guilty of a felony. If your kid was driving your car and his buddy dropped some meth crystals on the floor, you know, I mean, it was just silly.
Bad friends.
But anyways, that one got taken care of. So my suggestion is we review the amendments to the bill that passed the Senate, see if there's anything else that we, our prosecutors and cops, want, and not reject the whole thing. That was, you know, be my strong recommendation. But absolutely ascertain it's got to get done. And oh, by the way, the courts and prosecutors and law enforcement need to get spun up.
That historical, maybe at the public safety we can do that, and that historical perspective of, look, this was a good thing, then here's these problems, and here
Yep.
we're fixing it, and it's all good.
And you're not required to agree with me.
Really out of order. That'd be fun. So I can do that, and like I said, I've had the preliminary discussions on we like 54. I'll have the discussion that is what else might there be, and we can see what that is. Back on the port, I continue. Obviously, we all thought, and the administration thought that was the most important thing. It surprised me how many other things we got that weren't like. I'm used to these being ignored by the legislature, and it seems like it wasn't.
We had a very focused press on very specific
great.
legislators to
So
get
I was
that through.
going to be all jaded and say these things aren't worth much, but it seems like it was this time. And
We
so good.
also did a lot to triangulate some of the other cities that would benefit from those changes. So the non-consensual liens was supported by Juneau and Valdez and Fairbanks, and we had letters of support and basically spent a lot of time bringing them all into a room to make sure we were all on the same page. So I think that helped.
Did the municipal league weigh in with you?
No.
We did have a resolution on the fire sprinklers that
Yes.
made it to AML that the assembly passed. So that's another consideration if there's anything you guys want to forward to AML for their consideration for resolutions at the upcoming conference.
Right, they're gonna be in town in November.
We should be working on that.
I was going to say I don't know what their deadline is.
I don't either.
I think it's sometime in October though, so
Yeah.
I think there's time.
So on the port, because it's still our biggest priority, it seemed to me, though appropriately handled, that we kind of had it backwards in this, and then we came in and said port, we named the port, and I know they consider it the Anchorage port, and we say it benefits the whole state, but that is an argument that anyway, it's hard to win. I know Trainy's got that resolution, but we said port, and by the way, it probably needs to be on the GeoBond or some portion of it. It seemed to me leading, and I see it here and appreciate it, with the GeoBond. That is, we feel like because capital budgets have been so whacked over the last 4 or 5 years, and probably not going to be there for the next pick your number, we are going to kill our construction industry and all the associated aspects of it if we have nothing we're building. And we're trying to build with land swaps here, we're trying to keep things going, we're putting municipal bonds, but if the state doesn't build over a, again, pick your number, 5 to 10 year period, you just wipe out. So the only real place that you can get construction money is by doing a GeoBond. So can we all agree we're doing a GeoBond? And then when they come to us and say, now what does Anchorage want on it? We'll say, we want the port,
Right.
or it to be a big part. But when we leave with the port, it seems like it turns off every other part of the state. They just hear, Anchorage wanting. But saying, we all want this. And besides the construction aspects, it has seemed to me for a while that this is an important vote to have happen. Like, I like it for the campaign and the gut check that it is for Alaska, that we say, do you want to live here or do you just want to turn out the lights and go home? Like, are we going to stay or go? And I like a GeoBond as much for that reason, that we have a public vote that says we are willing to spend X, borrow X, because we're intend to be here and not let it go away. And if we can't succeed in that, we know something as well. But I think we can. And so both for what it does in actual capital, what it does for the port, but also what it does for us kind of as a state, I'd like to flip around the way we talk about the priority and say, what we are telling you is we need a GeoBond to keep construction going in this state.
Well,
and
it's a
by the way, what
commitment
do
to
you
the-
want?
Commitment to the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That we're looking beyond the next 6 months or a year. We have to have a long-term vision, and obviously the Port of Anchorage, at least half of what it comes through there goes to other parts of the state.
Oh, yes.
And so, and I see our request is for $298 million. Well, that's, the cost of the whole project is over $500 million. And so we're just asking for the state to, pay their fair share. They certainly shouldn't expect the citizens of Anchorage to pay the total cost of the port when half of the stuff that goes through there goes to other support the other cities around the state.
So we send groceries, fuel, all kinds of hardware and everything to Bush, and they send us drunks and sex offenders and stoners.
And they think it's an even trade. And so we feel like we might be getting the short end of the stick.
Yeah, I think Eric's reasoning is good. And if Anchorage showed that we're willing to do our share, that really authenticates asking the state to cough up the money for the rest of the state share, particularly if we can quantify it.
Right.
I disagree with wanting the Keynesian idea of government spending money in the downtimes, to stimulate the economy. But spending money on things that are absolutely valid that we gotta have and changing the timing makes lots of sense.
Yeah, you have to maintain your infrastructure, if your, businesses and economy are going to continue to grow. That's
Or even operate as it is.
right.
So I guess I don't mean any diminution of that, of the port as our priority, but simply that you can, it seems easier to start a conversation with a Fairbanks legislator about why we need a geo bond, why we need construction all around. You get everybody on board. You get to ask, what do you want on your Fairbanks part? And they get to talk about how they want a university thing or thing, whatever it is. And then, what do you want? Well, we probably put out whatever we can do of ours is going to be the port.
And we started those conversations last year, during the session last year, with Fairbanks and other cities to say, what's the thing you want? We've also talked with the co-chairs of Senate Finance, and they seem to not be frozen against the idea at this point in time.
Was there a lot of just general resistance to GeoBond?
Yes.
On we don't want to borrow?
Yes.
Well, the credit rating has been downgraded, so actually going to have to pay a little bit more in interest rates than they would have a couple of years ago, too.
But you're talking about the city doing a geo bid.
No, Geo State, man. Well, I mean, we can do too, yeah, but that we get everybody interested in. It's chicken and egg on, this is going to be a combination of municipal debt, state debt, and revenue debt. And and revenue means charging the people there, so it's just going to come out of your price of milk. But,
And federal money as well.
okay, yeah, and there's some, litigation money that's been there, so there are other components. But with whatever the state does for construction, I think we would allocate either a lot or all of whatever portion we get in the negotiations to this port. And then, the question is, do you do state debt then contingent on us making up the difference through a combination of revenue and local? Or do you do it the other way around? We could say, here's our municipal bond for port, conditional on you guys stepping up. We could put on the April ballot, would you guys do $100 million for the port if the state did 3? And kind of call their blah, and then that gets you, and then there'd have to be a revenue for some of the shortfall in federal months and whatever we get.
And that bumps the tax cap a little.
It's real money out of real people's pockets.
Ethan will love it.
Well, it goes to a specific place. Would it pass? If you said $100 million and that costs, we haven't done that big a bond. All the bonds.
We'd have to educate the public so they knew that if we had a pretty good shaker and there was more damage done to the port and we had to start bringing things in from Seward, that we're going to be adding another 10% on the price of their groceries or whatever. And so they realize that you either pay now or you pay later, or you pay both.
It's usually been easier to say, the state has 300, now should we do 100 to take advantage of it? People like that argument better than give me 100 on spec that the state might. I guess it's outside of our legislative committee pay grade, but it does seem like the kind of strategy we should understand as an assembly. We're either doing our part contingent on them or their part contingent on us.
Yeah, I think we obviously have to keep that in mind when we're setting our priorities and figuring out which bills we're going to lobby for and who we're going to talk to and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Forgive me as a new guy here, but the money is really very important, what we want from the state. These other things, I'm tickled with your list. And I think we ought to have a really full court press and be smart about it. So when you go to talk to the Fairbanks guys, here's the volume of freight that you guys get a year, and here's the value of that freight across our dock. Now, we're glad to supply that to you, but we need your help.
And we've had similar conversations with the military because all of the
Yep.
military bases are supplied through the port, so.
Yep. And I'm trying to get copies of this really good ADC. This came out a week ago, and so on and so forth. But it says the visitor industry, and medical stuff are the bright lights in our economy. And the dock and having 2 ships in here, really, really helpful. And most of those people don't stay here more than a couple nights, and they're out spending their money in other parts of the state.
It
What
sounds
el-
like a geo bond might be a good topic for an AML resolution if the committee's interested in doing that. That's the type of thing I think that would be appealing to your smaller communities than your other big cities.
Yeah, and that's from classic. When we said geobond, they said we didn't want to hear it. When we said port, they're like local issue, which of course it ain't, but it gets a lot of here's Anchorage wanting to talk about Anchorage again. And so from that experience and trying to lobby for that, it seems like we say geobond, and everyone says, oh, interesting, geobond. Everybody else, blah, blah, blah. We can start thinking about what we want. They pass geobond, and then when they say, what do you want in your geobond, it's port. But I'd rather lead geo than lead port.
Right. Well, I can tell you, that just, having been to an AML conference here just 3 weeks ago, when you talk to people on the AML board from other communities, those communities also have problems with their port, and they also need millions and millions of dollars to upgrade their facilities. And so when I start talking to them, then they come back with their wants and needs as well. And so, it's they would maybe support us if we would support them, but it just you have to start somewhere.
And we've started doing outreach to other communities, looking at what was on their capital request list with the legislature last year and the year before that, to sort of pull together that cohort of cities. And AML's help would be great.
It's a little bit different. It's not apples and apples. Their
Right.
capital requests are for their local needs. Our capital, or operating and capital request, is to help us to continue to serve the rest of the state.
So things like the Port of Anchorage, the university, things like that are usually on the list, whereas
The drunks and stoners.
smaller projects may not be.
Right. Okay. Let me see. We'll look at the agenda, see where we are here.
We didn't really add much new, right? It was our old list minus what we got done.
This is just the first meeting, right?
Right.
Thank you. This is the overview, and now we would ask the assembly to consider what they want to see included.
Mhm.
We're still working on our list. We go to our department heads and ask them, particularly if there are language changes that would help them function better, that are held at the state level. But we went through a couple of years, and that's how we got to this original list, is various departments said this would really help us operate better, more efficiently if this would change or that would change. And some of it's not very interesting to state legislators, so it gets a little difficult to make sure that they're acting on it. But we pick the ones that make the largest impact and push those.
Yes, some of these might
Just keep
not
knocking
be
them out.
Top of mind or headline grabbing type items, but we have to keep figuring out a way to make things function correctly or as well as possible. So, as far as the October special session, I didn't actually get a chance to see the paper this morning. Did the governor come out with anything? Did we notice over the weekend?
I think the only announcement he made was about SB 91.
Just the SB 91?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of rumors about what will be part of the fiscal package, but I think that's still all subject to negotiation.
The call is fiscal matters and SB 91?
SB 54.
Just
Specifically.
Just the 54 last.
Mhm.
Right, which is the
I-
improvements to.
Yeah.
Fred?
Are we going to ask for the preparation of the cost of Anchorage satisfying the state's social needs?
Well, that's something we could certainly,
Thank you.
To talk to them about. I mean, they actually have to realize that we have expenses here in Anchorage because we're sort of in charge of trying to solve some of the social problems that have been pushed onto
Yeah,
us.
so the question is, the research, back of the envelope accuracy. I've asked Nancy to get it, but she has no way of looking at property values, property taxes, and the impact and all that. So it's
And
just-
I believe Jason and I both made a note on our documents to
yeah,
make sure
so
that we look
if
into
the
that.
administration would equip Nancy to get that answer, with some defensible numbers, that's a startling number.
Mhm.
And I think that information really helps to bolster our case for revenue sharing the money for these social problems.
Right.
So we're going to do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's that would be one of our priorities for the committee here.
I'm sure there are a lot of variables that can change the number based on a number of things, but we can find out what that range is.
Yeah, it's going to be over 50 million if it's 900 folks and 58K apiece.
Yeah. And that number is renewable. It comes around every year.
It's an operating expense.
It's not a one-time
Darn it.
number. So we have to pay for that every single year. Part of our budget for public safety. Any other ideas or discussion about new priorities for 2018? We have that down on our agenda. Anything that we haven't already discussed? Anybody can think of?
I'm impressed with the list you guys had last year. You done good.
Thank you. I'll let the mayor know you said something.
Yeah, we didn't, I see we got PERS and TERS termination study on here. That's the 400-pound gorilla in the room that nobody really wants to talk about.
And that's a holdover request from when Jennifer Johnston was on the assembly. That was something that she was really focused on, and she's still focused on in the House.
What does that mean?
That's a good question. It's a figuring out how much it costs for each of the municipalities to participate in the system if the state starts pulling back.
So a determination study in PERS, if you eliminate a job class, whoever the payer is has to figure out what the costs would be for those positions through retirement, basically. There's a penalty.
Okay, all right, boy, that is a zinger. The position that the sovereign is required to cough up the money to pay that guy's retirement as if the job had never gone away through 65 or something?
Essentially.
Woo!
I mean, I think there's some modifiers in there, but there is, if a municipality is to reduce an entire job class, you can cut positions, but if you eliminate a job class, it triggers this.
Oh,
We're
PERS
firing
termination
all of
study.
our plumbers, and we've got to figure out how the plumbers that we've got in the system get paid out. We got to pony up the
Wow.
money that says, here's all the plumbers we have.
It's
and
like the penalty of removing those people from the system, the municipality bears some of that burden and continues to pay into the system, even though those employees are not there.
I thought it meant, what if we got out entirely? What if we just, I guess it would in its extreme.
But yeah, I think we're doing, what is it, 22% right now?
That's right.
And if the state quit paying their share, that number would go up significantly for local municipalities around the state. Anchorage, we have a tax base, we might be able to afford that, we'd have to cut a lot, but the other municipalities, they don't have a tax base, that there'd be no way for them to cover that.
We wouldn't be able to either.
I mean, so I guess there's no bill currently filed about that. We just have to realize in the back of our mind that that's still a possibility at some time.
And it's
in the future.
something, yeah, that AML has been focused on as well.
What do they want to do?
I don't know.
What's the solution?
Ignore it. That's what they've been doing.
Well, they've been continuing to talk to legislators to make sure that the state continues to pay their share, because if they decide they're going to send those bills to the rest of us, we want to make sure they know that most of the places around the state are not going to be able to pay that.
Yeah, respectfully, my experience is the state's been paying way more than their share of the PERS. And during the years, I think the three of us were there, we put 8 or 10 billion against this PERS-TERS thing. And
Well, the actuaries gave us some bad advice there about a decade ago, or
20 years.
20 years ago, or whenever that was, and
Yeah, that wasn't all of it, but you're right. But at least historically, the state has done more than their share.
so those mistakes have gotten us behind the 8 ball, and it just takes a lot of years to get caught up, if in fact we ever do.
Yeah.
We just have to be happy that we're not as bad off as the state of Illinois.
Yeah. Yay, team.
They're at the point now where they're selling toll roads to companies to bring in money to pay operating expenses for the state. So we just have to pat ourselves on the back and tell ourselves we're in a much better position than at least the state of Illinois is. Anyway, what other comments do we have, or anything else that anyone wants to discuss while we're here today, or do we want to?
Pete, I would suggest that we get clear from our leadership what we're going to do on the special session. My guess is SB 91, anything else, and that if you all agree that after we get through our budget process, that we get real specific about meeting with the members of the finance committee, particularly local ones, and assign small teams of us to go do it.
That's the plan.
Okay, all right.
So
You have a short window between when the Assembly will pass the capital budget, including the legislative program for 2018, and when folks will be heading down to Juneau.
Yes.
So you'll have
Yeah.
right around Christmas.
Yep. Yeah, but also I think there's components. Well, do you consider these grants to social services groups, domestic violence, and these other ones? Is that you consider that's operating?
It's operating costs.
Yeah. So there's capital, operating, and ordinance changes that we're interested in, but that's an operating one. So all right.
You guys will pass this legislative program with your capital and operating budgets.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the administration will be coming out with the 2018 program sometime in the next month or so.
Yeah. I think it'll take us a couple of weeks to get any additional input from departments and then pass it along.
And so then we can have that, plan to discuss that at our legislative committee meeting next month.
Yeah.
I will look at AML and get their deadlines for resolutions and see if the GO bond is a resolution that folks are interested in forwarding to AML for inclusion in their packet of resolutions for the conference. If someone wants to volunteer to sponsor that at the assembly level, let me know.
Yeah, and once we figure out what our priorities are, then Suzanne and I can maybe present those when we have our November conference here in Anchorage.
So how that'll happen is we'll see what AML's deadline is for resolutions. The assembly will pass a resolution and then we forward that to AML. You can present, they'll consider it for inclusion.
Sounds like a plan.
Jason,
Okay.
Impressed.
All right.
Forgive me for running off with the mouth on that Chrome. It's just a step.
Any other
I know it is, but gravel.
member comments or audience comments?
I need it and I can take it from
I
you.
think you're good.
I guess we must be done. All right, let's adjourn then.
Meet downstairs.